Guatemala, once the heart of the Mayan Empire, was under Spanish control for 300 years from 1523 to 1821. In 1821, Guatemala won their independence, but their quality of life did not improve. Their independence triggered a string of military dictators that would eventually lead to the Guatemalan Civil War. Guatemala had finally come to a peaceful, democratically elected leader in 1951 when Jacobo Arbenz Guzman came to power.
Some people felt that he was a really good president that was elected freely and was a good change for the country.
Even though Arbenz was helping the Guatemalan people, the U.S. did not like him because he was taking steps towards nationalizing the Guatemalan banana industry. During the 1950s, the United States used the domino theory to guide its foreign policy, which is the theory that if one country falls to communism, then others will join. The U.S. would go to extreme lengths to stop the perceived communist threat. The U.S. used the CIA to train and arm Guatemalan exiles for a coup against Arbenz. In 1953, 150 CIA-trained exiles, led by Guatemalan Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas, invaded Guatemala to take down Arbenz. The coup was successful, and Carlos Castillo Armas came to power in 1953.
And there's a lot of confusion, particularly in the middle class, in which some people felt that the liberation of the country, as some people call it, was a good thing, and some others felt that it was an illegitimate coup.
However, Castillo Armas was not in charge for long. He was assassinated in 1957, which entered Guatemala into its extremely deadly 36-year civil war. The Guatemalan War was not a war fought between two armies. The war was fought between guerrilla forces and the Guatemalan government. The first guerrillas in the Guatemalan Civil War were two former military officers that worked with the Guatemalan Workers' Party, or PGT. They had the goal of restoring democracy to Guatemala. They started a campaign of terrorism under the name of the Rebel Armed Forces. The guerrilla warfare between the rebels and the government continued throughout the 60s and 70s. In March of 1982, a triumvirate, which was headed by General Efrain Rios Montt, was put in charge as the result of a manipulated election.
Some of us, and most of the people that knew what the situation was, realized that it was not really a democratic process that brought him to power.
A few months later, Rios Montt dissolved the triumvirate and declared himself dictator of Guatemala. The citizens quickly lost hope that Rios Montt would make positive changes when he declared it legal for the government to kill citizens. He began to strictly censor the press, and he abolished fair trials. Rios Montt would become known for brutal massacres on peasant villages.
It was scary, to say the least, that he now became the main power in the country.
In the early 1980s, the rebel armed forces started to bring the fight to urban areas. The rebel organizations started bombing government, police, and business targets in Guatemala City.
For 30-some years, the civil war was mainly in the rural areas of Guatemala. And so at this time, it had moved into the urban areas, and there were several attempts on military installations and also on civilian buildings. So it was kind of a scary time once the war moved into the urban areas, including the capital city.
In response to these terrorist attacks, the government used a scorched earth strategy against its citizens. The Guatemalan government would systematically destroy entire villages.
Empezó pues a combatir según los militares que empezaron a combatir con la subversión, pero no era un enfrentamiento simplemente con la guerrilla, sino también empezaron los bombardeos para la población civil.
For example, there was a policy in which the Guatemalan military would go to the rural areas and just capture young males to make them part of the military. And then they would go back and fight against their potentially relatives or friends.
While all these terrible things were happening in the rural areas of Guatemala, the general population had almost no way of finding out about the actions of the government, because all news sources were controlled by the state.
The media was heavily influenced by the military and by the people in power. So the majority of the information that you got, even in the so-called free press, was about the actions of the insurgency.
One of the many massacres that took place during the Civil War was the massacre at Los Dos Aires, which killed 160 citizens in 1982.
Most of those massacres that are documented now, we didn't hear about until after the Civil War had ended and the peace treaty was signed.
In August of 1983, Rios Montt was removed from power by a military coup. Historians believe that over 200,000 people were killed or forced to leave Guatemala during Rios Montt's time in power. Rios Montt's term was one of Guatemala's bloodiest periods. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the war continued, but the extreme violence began to slow. The beginning of the end of the war started when Jorge Serrano Elias was elected as president of Guatemala in 1990. Even though Serrano Elias was a right-wing leader who had previously been backed by Rios Montt, he helped Guatemala move towards peace. Once he was elected, he ended brutal policies that the government had committed against the peasants. In 1992, Serrano came to an agreement with Mexico to allow the return of 40,000 Guatemalan refugees that had fled during Rios Montt's reign. Despite these steps in the right direction, Serrano Elias was kicked out of office in 1993 when he attempted to suspend the Guatemalan Constitution. Ramiro de Leon Carpio was chosen by the National Congress to replace Serrano Elias in 1993. During Leon Carpio's term, he tried to end corruption among Guatemalan officials. He also started the peace talks with the UNRG in an attempt to end the Civil War.
I lived in Guatemala in 93 and 94. There was a lot of optimism during that time. I think that the economy was starting to get slowly better.
On December 29th in 1996, the officials from both sides came together to sign the Guatemalan Peace Agreement, which officially ended the long and grueling Civil War.
I think that the country is slowly going in the right direction. I think that the problems are complex. And I think that the whole country won't improve or go in the real direction of progress until we all recognize that everybody that lives in Guatemala is equal and should be treated the same way. And it's going to be a slow process, but I think that we will go in the right direction and we'll become a better country